Good morning, good afternoon, good day to us all. My name is Amrita Kochar, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Technology at Bennett Jones. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to the latest panel discussion from your friends over at the Legal Marketing Association. Today's session promises to prepare you for the conversations and paths forwards to support diversity, equity, and inclusion at your firm. You know, we've heard from researchers and thought leaders that diverse groups lend us to diverse perspectives, leading to improved decision-making, problem-solving, creativity, and innovation. And we've also noted some improvements in the current state of diversity. For example, the Federation of Law Societies of Canada reports an increase of female lawyers from about 41% in 2013 to 46% in 2019. Also, the Law Society of British Columbia saw its largest increase under the Minority Group Association, with an increase from about 11% in 2013 to 16% in 2019. We're also noting increases in the LGBTQ2+, with increases over about the same period of time from 2 to 3%, along with Indigenous increase as well from just about 2% to nearly 3%. Surprisingly, though, we're also hearing from clients that they just aren't seeing enough representation to meet their evolving DEI standards. So to help us navigate the current marketplace opportunity, to look at how we can implement best practices, I'm joined by Susie Williams, National Director of Marketing and Business Development at Macmillan, where she drives client-centric marketing and business development communications and strategy. Susie is also very passionate about incorporating client experience to increase organizational responsiveness, to elevate awareness, and to push growth. Susie leads the initiative that once brought together voices of Black firm members, forming the firm's Black Staff Affinity Group, and was awarded the firm's Inclusion and Diversity Award for promoting and advancing diversity and inclusiveness at Macmillan, and for inspiring others to do so as well. Thank you for joining us, Susie. And of course, excellent. We also welcome Corinne Lightning Earl, a Blue Thunderbird woman and Cree from the Samson Cree Nation. She currently serves as a lawyer with the Wakatoan Law and Governance Lodge. She also has served on Indigenous initiatives as a liaison to the Law Society of Alberta, was president of the Indigenous Bar Association for about 6 years, and the list goes on and on. She's held many, many other board appointments as well. Corinne's work focuses with Indigenous clients, supporting the revitalization of Indigenous laws. She advises on areas of Indigenous governance, Indigenous child welfare, Indian Act matters as well. And she's an accomplished speaker on Indigenous culture awareness and relationship building. It's also a pleasure to have you here, Corinne. And finally, we have Samantha Samuels, Manager of Equity and Diversity and Inclusion at BLG, where she leads the firm's EDI reporting efforts and seeks to foster an inclusive workplace by developing initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion, rolling out education and awareness programs, overseeing that the firm's policies, their practices, and their talent-related activities are all also aligned with their diversity and inclusion goals. And prior to joining BLG, Samantha actually practiced general corporate and securities law at another Bay Street firm, and has since led equity and inclusion efforts in schools, workplaces, and in the broader community. At a previous firm, Samantha actually was instrumental in the creation of the Black Lives Matter Affinity Group and the inception of a mini pro bono clinic offering legal services to Black businesses that have been affected by COVID. Samantha has also developed a CLE accredited presentation for firm members on the power in the use of language. Samantha, thank you again for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I'm sure many of you are eager to get right into the thick of things. I have two quick messages to share from you from our event organizers. First is a special thank you to our friends and our event sponsor, Cubital Fugitive. Thank you very much for your continued support with our LMA programming. It is deeply, deeply appreciated. And number two, I'm pleased to advise you on the latest inductees of the LMA Hall of Fame. This recognition is awarded to a group of individuals or an individual for their outstanding contributions to the legal marketing industry and association. So 2022 welcomes Iris Jones, Chief Business Development and Marketing Officer at Ackerman, Deborah Ferrone, Strategic Marketing Advisor of Ferrone Advisors, and also author of Best Practices in Law Firms and Business Development. And lastly, Ashraf Lakhani, Chief Business Development and Marketing Officer at Porter Hedges. So congratulations to this year's award winners. We thank them for their continued service. So now that we're all on the same page, now that we're all updated on the LMA news, let's dive right in. So Samantha, I'm looking to you first. I read a recent Thomson Reuters article that basically expressed this deep level of involvement of clients when it comes to defining DEI standards for law firms and legal partners through a series of client surveys, or at least this is something that's being more and more common. And so I admit I was actually a bit surprised to learn about the level of involvement on this front. So I was hoping just to get us all on the same page, could you help us level set, right? Introduce us to the concept of DEI. What does it stand for? What are the differences between each of them? And ultimately, why is this so important to our clients? Why are they so invested in this?
Of course, and thanks again, Amrita, for the introduction. So defining DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's, first of all, a very broad definition. It's a lot of things lumped into a three-letter acronym. But I think very importantly, it's important to recognize it as a commitment just to creating and fostering spaces where everyone feels valued, welcome, has equal access to opportunities that they need to develop their skills and knowledge, and also to be advanced in their careers and have a voice to contribute to whatever organization, law firm that they're in. And so that, again, requires a lot of things, including, and most importantly, I think, prioritizing systemic solutions to systemic problems, because biases and oppressions typically are institutionalized, have been institutionalized and structuralized within so many of our institutions within society, including, I speak personally from a law perspective. And so it's so necessary to systemically institutionalize the solutions to those problems, building cultures of respect, acceptance, inclusion. And that happens, I think, first and foremost by embedding equity, diversity, and inclusion into all processes within an organization, from talent, and that includes recruitment, retention, to belonging initiatives, including training, education, ERGs, action groups, affinity groups. And so diversity, I think when we think about the word diversity, we think a lot about representation. That's getting the organization, the firm, whatever it may be, to kind of look like society, reflect the diverse multicultural society that we live in. Equity is implementing a lot of those programs that I just discussed, where you're allowing people, and inclusion, allowing people to be able to bring their full, true selves to work, and to have equal opportunities and access to resources, and to opportunities to grow within an organization.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. You know, one of the things that I think we sometimes shy away from speaking about because it makes us uncomfortable is race. And so just as an extension of that, you know, I've heard quite frequently the term racial bias. And so, you know, how does that play into situations, you know, that you've experienced in the past or in the workplace? And, you know, what does it mean and how do we address it?
Oh, it's just one of the many biases, again, that are institutionalized. In law school, I actually wrote a paper called Racism in Canada, like racism in the law in Canada. And I think that a lot of times, first of all, I'm really glad that we're now in a post-racial society. Yeah, for a little while there, everyone's like, oh, racism doesn't exist. So thankfully, at least I think after 2020 and the untimely death of George Floyd, a lot of us have realized, oh, this is an issue. A lot of us realized, I lived that experience, but many people realize that that's something that's continuously affecting many Black and Brown communities, BIPOC. And I feel like it's important then to realize the systemic, again, nature of these things. When we think about things like slavery, which again happened in Canada, we don't realize that how legal it was. The law was very instrumental in legalizing and implementing policies and things that allowed for slavery to happen. It wasn't just like it was a ruckus. It was very strategized way to control the bodies of Black and Brown peoples and Indigenous peoples. So I think it's very important then to address those things by going back into the laws that created that, seeing how that was allowed, and creating new laws, policies, procedures, and systemic procedures specifically in organizations to address that and to undo that harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine it's not just the legislation alone. It's also how we all perceive things. It's how we all address
Mhm.
things, not only in the workplace, but also at home. And so, there's a lot of work that we have to do on that front. And I'll put a pin in that one because we have some questions on allyship and what people can actually do from a social perspective to try
Yeah.
to change those perspectives. So we'll put a pin in that one for now. But Corinne, I know you've got an interesting perspective on the differentiation between the definitions in the term DEI. Please share with us.
For me, I think it's about what emphasis are you putting in terms of is it authentic in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion in some of the workplaces that we're at? Because it's really easy to put those, they become buzzwords and people are really want to be behind it. But if they're not actually doing the authentic work, we will know and we will have conversations, and we know the safe places and the safe firms, and in our communities, and as lawyers, we know the places that are authentic, and then we know the places that decided that okay, we're going to have Orange Shirt Day. We've never talked about it before, but we're going to have Orange Shirt Day now. In terms of the inclusion, is do people, Indigenous people, feel welcome in the firms or welcome in the spaces in terms of to just be Indigenous people without having to ask for accommodations, that it's already there, that things are already taken note of. And so I always think of inclusion as I don't have to ask, it's already done for me. I don't have to be the trailblazer to make those spaces safe.
Understood. And just to, because I feel like I often need to have that reframe and the reminder. So diversity is really about allowing the platform for diverse groups. And equity is about offering them the equal opportunity, and inclusion is about making sure that they feel almost like naturally involved.
Yeah, so I think about it. I think about a room for smudging for Indigenous. For myself, Cree, so I practice Cree spirituality, and so when I'm going into places, it's nice to already. I see places that operate with inclusion based on, we have smudging in this room. It's already here, and it's not the broom closet.
Yeah.
And I don't have to go ask for the special sprinklers to be shut down so that we can smudge in that room. It's places where that's already taken into account and it's already there, and so it's like, and sometimes you feel weird because it's this is taken care of, but that's where we should be moving towards.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Susie, I'm going to come to you for any sort of final thoughts in terms of, just level setting on what the term means. And again, I think why this is so important right now, not only for our firms, but also for our clients.
Yeah, so as has been described, it is very broad. One of the things that wasn't mentioned that I do want to raise is that commitment to safety, like a safe environment. It's this issue has been around for years and years to come, and it's interesting because with the George Floyd passing, as we started to share our stories in Canada, there were many people that were taken aback, couldn't believe that such racism could it really exist here in Canada. And so many people were enlightened, both across the professional services industry and the clients in which we service. And they are really looking for to work with providers that understand it, get it, and can bring the greatest benefits of diversity of thought, different perspectives, so that some great solutions can, come to the forefront. But that safe space really pushed forward many of the internal conversations that I think have to happen first before people run out and say it's solved or this is what we're going to do. So yeah, that's how I'd bring it together.
Absolutely. I think that safety and just creating a space for open dialogue, because, people are inevitably, again, if they are unaware, it's a learning opportunity. And with learning, there's often, errors made in judgment, in language that's used, so I think that's definitely a level set, just opening up to the group as well. Are there any other tips? And again, we'll get through some of the questions on allyship, but is there anything that we can do right now as firms to help develop safer spaces for the start of these types of conversations?
From my perspective, it is actually putting in policies and programs, education, bringing facilitators, at our firm, we've increased the number of affinity groups, and that's what sort of drove my perspective to start up, look around the firm, look for others that looked like me to create the, our Black staff affinity group where we could collect and address the issues, be a support network, and advance any issues or concerns to, in our firm, we have a formal leadership group on equity, diversity, and inclusion, an advisory body. So putting those policies and structures in place help channel.
And offering, one of the other key points I took away from you is being able to build community at that point, to feel that safety as well. Obviously with numbers, we do feel a bit safer,
Yes.
and we feel that we can affect some change on that front. So again, it's not just about using terminology, it's about actually doing the work, making sure that you've got policies in place.
And if I can just add to that as well, Amrita, I think it's important to also have people dedicated to these roles in these spaces, because I think a lot of harm is also done turning to these groups, underrepresented groups, marginalized groups, and turning to them to do this work. It's a lot of work off the side of someone's desk to try to fix systemic and institutional issues that have been around for centuries. So having somebody dedicated to that role so that you're not burdening affected groups with this unpaid labor, first of all, and also emotional tax that comes along with doing that work on top of the work that you're already expected to do.
You bring something up so interesting on that front in terms of, the burden and the onus should not be on the affected party to have to correct it. And so it is I absolutely, I'm glad that you brought that point up, because this is a shared responsibility as a whole. It's not solely on the shoulders of those affected groups. So that's great. I think that gives us all a really firm understanding in terms of what our baseline is here, what we're really trying to achieve. And so I'm going to turn our attention to something a bit more directed to our folks that are watching right now. And I'm sure many of them are looking to go back to their BD, their marketing teams with a better understanding on the kinds of DEI initiatives that they can help implement, maybe a bit more specifically on the types of policies, the type of procedures, anywhere to start. So Susie, I'm looking at you. What's your advice to this group? What can they do to become better advocates and ultimately push for change?
Well, there's a couple of things. Before I do get into that, I do want to highlight, it's a little bit of a seesaw, because we have a business development responsibility to help our firm grow and generate revenue and build client relationships. And then there's the marketing aspect of it, right? And as we talk about authenticity and genuine, you don't, I wouldn't recommend that you push and promote your role, your firm's role, your organization's role in championing equity and diversity just so that you can help build top of mind awareness. You have to, it's important to not only talk about the commitment that you are making to build more inclusive environments, you have to follow through and demonstrate, as Corinne mentioned, that people will see through, right? So that's the one, there's, and on occasion, we have actually stayed out of the social media fury, because there are elements of our firm that we're developing, we're working on our practices, and we need to continue those internal discussions before we move forward and promote, all that we are doing. Certainly, I think it's important to share progress and milestones. But you have to really look at the two as what's our responsibility to clients, and what's our what are some of the pitfalls from a marketing perspective to try, leverage or take advantage of something that an organization might not be truly committed to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, it's not a complicated. It's not complicated. A lot of the what our legal marketing professionals can bring to the table is really driven by the clients. As you mentioned, we are seeing an increase in the demand on the proposal side, increase in not only what is your EDI policy, but it's getting deeper into what are your specific goals? What is the makeup of the legal team that you're going to put on to manage the file? And for Canadian businesses, this is a little bit of a challenge because not only to collect the information, but to share the information because of some of the limitations of our Canadian privacy and human rights laws. So organizations do have to get creative, not just to satisfy the clients, but to gain an understanding about their EDI makeups within the firm, so that it's not just to the benefit of the client, but to understand, who are the firm members and what ideas and innovations by tapping into that diversity across the firm, how do you ultimately benefit to the client, offer that benefit?
I'm curious, you bring up a point about the, again, that we're seeing the emerging trends. Clients are really invested to learn more. How are they sharing those requests with you exactly?
Many are coming right through the questionnaires. Some are coming as in the form of questions within a proposal request. Some are coming from the client interactions because the in-house counsel have shared that their organizations are putting a greater focus on EDI, and they want to align with partners that are doing the same. Although it's interesting, yesterday Bloomberg Law gave us an update on Coca-Cola, and I don't know if everyone had a chance to see it, but unfortunately, Coca-Cola decided to, organizations backslide. Basically, they had in place a commitment for their outside counsel to ensure that the outside counsel that they worked with was truly a diverse group of lawyers. And yesterday, they reported that they're scrapping those diversity requirements, which is, quite disappointing from my perspective. At the same time, I did read just before we got on the call a little bit of good news from Law Times that announced today that there are going to be more legal scholarships for Black students coming through the Lincoln Alexander School of Law. Lincoln Alexander School of Law is the only Black law school in Canada that's named after a prominent Black leader. And that's in partnership with Black North. Many of you, your organizations, your CEOs may have already made that Black North initiative pledge to combat systemic racism and actually affect change, as our CEO has. So, there's things happening every day. You think you make progress, and then an organization, a potential client, sort of throws that out the window.
That's certainly surprising to hear, especially at the international, the caliber, of course, of Coca-Cola. That is certainly surprising. I know I've heard of groups like HP, for example, that have essentially said, if you don't meet our DEI standards, we're going to withhold, 10% of your legal fees, which is quite extreme and something that, up until 2 years ago was really relatively unheard of. So a little surprising on Coca-Cola's side, and we'll look to learn more on that. But I'm really pulling away two things in terms of initiatives that can really affect some change right now. One is sort of going to the root, making sure that opportunities are made available for any disenfranchised group. And that's, again, just trying to deal with the source problem itself. And then what I'm hearing is at the organizational level, making sure that we have reporting opportunities, and we have the infrastructure for reporting so that we can start to respond to some of these growing client needs. Samantha, I'm going to open it up to you. Anything else that you've maybe noticed on your side of things in terms of initiatives that are really affecting change, and something that maybe our folks watching wherever they may be might be able to take away?
Sorry,
you're on mute.
absolutely. Yeah. And even back to the client piece, Susie nailed it on the head. We are getting so many inquiries. And specifically, I think what we might have been used to seeing before was typically, oh, what is the makeup of your team? Check a box. And now much more in depth, like tell us exactly what you're doing. And larger requests for show that and demonstrate that you are actually giving opportunities, first of all, to representative groups within the firm, but also that, and that goes back to the inclusion piece, because there might be diversity. These people might exist in the firms, but then they want to know, are they doing the work, and show us the hours. Like, it's getting very specific. So a lot of progress on that, and which I think is very important, because again, you want to create those equal opportunities. But I think just there's just so many opportunities for everyone really to get involved. I think now even to have these conversations, and I think it's very important that on an institutional level that there's a push to educate people and to and we'll get into this. I know we're going to talk about allyship, so maybe I'll actually just stop there.
Perfect. I love it. And I'll actually open the floor over to Corinne. Corinne, I'm curious, especially from the lawyer perspective. What initiatives have you seen that have actually been very effective? What would you love to see in the marketplace right now? Over to you.
I think we need to move. I think one of the things is moving away from the savior complex when we're doing diversity initiatives. Like we see a lot of it with Indigenous peoples. Is, oh well, we have Orange Shirt Day, or we did this residential schools, and so I think moving away from that savior complex in terms of we don't need saving. We're not going to be, law firms aren't going to save Indigenous people. But what we can do is empower and create those safe places that we talked about. And not just in terms of firms that, we will look over and we'll see your pictures and all this stuff. And it's not even about just how do you promote the Indigenous people that work there. If you have any Indigenous people that work there, that maybe, if it's even safe to self-identify, are they Indigenous, and how do you authenticate that they're Indigenous? Pretending is a huge thing right now in Canada, where people state that they're Indigenous, but then later find out not so much, because it's really convenient to be Indigenous. And so when I think about firms and their hiring policies, when I'm talking with students, they will see who's been there before, what kind of opportunities, how long did the people stay there before, in terms of where did they move up in the level, and do they only hire Indigenous lawyers to do Indigenous law work? And have they been doing Indigenous law work since yesterday, where they decided, oh, we have child welfare, new legislation, we're also doing child welfare now. And so really looking at the work that they have been doing and ensuring that their Indigenous lawyers can do all types of law. And so when I meet with students, they're like, oh, well, I can go work for this firm because they have a big Indigenous section. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But you want to make sure that you're also practicing in other areas, and that you're not just limited to being hired as a summer student to go look up where all the powwows are this summer, because that has happened. And then when we think about work that firms are doing in terms of their give backs to community, we look at Indigenous community, sometimes it's as an extraction agency. They come in and they do the research, they do the work, and they do all of the independent, when residential school claims are going through, and then they would leave. And so putting back into those communities things that were being taken out, and how are we investing into those communities, and not just doing work that's related to that savior. So like when I meet with students or I'm going to hire them to work with our organizations, we ask what type of things have they done in terms of working with Indigenous people. And so a lot of the time the work comes back to working with Indigenous people and working with people in poverty that happen to be Indigenous. And so really shifting that mindset. And one thing that I've been talking a lot with firms is when it comes to Indigenous cultural awareness, it's moving from, I'm starting to see it move from, well, yes, we offer it, to, oh, actually, we pay for this entire course, the Canada, Indigenous Canada course, we're paying for it for anybody in our firm that wants to take it, to seeing it say it's a requirement. Because that education part, it also creates that safe place. If I'm working in a place where they don't know, about the Indian Act that, or any of those type of things, or don't know any of my history, which is right based in Canada, it doesn't create that safe place.
Yeah.
So I think really getting commitment to that education component, because it is a requirement by law. It's started to be a requirement by law societies. Alberta's moving towards that. Other provinces are doing that. So it's nice to see firms and organizations that have gone beyond that and taken the initiatives instead of waiting to be told. They've already gone in one step above.
Yeah, absolutely. One of, I think, the interesting points that I pulled from your discussion right there was almost, it sounds like there's a bit of bias, not only on the external side of things, but also even in the internal groups on the Indigenous side, to almost pigeonhole themselves to say, this is what I should specialize in, or this is where I can really make an impact. But really, it's about expanding those horizons and reminding folks that, again, from an equity perspective, you should not be just pigeonholed on that because of your background.
Yeah, and I see a lot of students feel sometimes when they're moving into that, they're like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to do Aboriginal law. I don't want to work Indigenous. Maybe I want to do corporate securities. I'm like, that's fantastic. We need more than that. We need to see more of us in all of those spaces. And so I really promote the students to do that and go into those places. And then some firms, they just are, sometimes they'll think automatically that the student isn't interested in that. I'm like, actually, no, like we can do all the things too.
So again, leveraging, really like pushing hard on that education front to start to battle some of those, unconscious biases that, I think are shared across the table on that front. So we're definitely pulling away. Education is key to really shifting the mindset on an organizational level. And then further on the initiative front, making sure that we again have, policies in place that are driven not by tokenism or by marketing efforts and endeavors, but really core to actually shifting what the workplace looks like and putting the workforce and clients first.
Absolutely. If I can just add to that, and that's such a great point that you made, Corinne. I think it's so important, and I think one of the main ways that you see that change is through representation. Because I know for myself, as when I was practicing as a young Black woman lawyer, not seeing many Black women partners, just generally on Bay Street, from my experience, it was kind of disheartening. And so speaking to the Indigenous experience, when I came over to BLG, and Cherie Brandt, who is one of our national leaders at the firm, and she's very heavily involved in our Indigenous law group, but also just amazing on the commercial practice side, and very well recognized, and is now on the board of TD, I believe. And just seeing that, what it would do for a young Indigenous law student to come in and say, okay, that's possible. And we have such a long way to go, again, even with respect to diversity and that representation piece. But I think it's very important that we start to see that firms start to reflect that more, because I don't think it's an issue, and just going back to the legal side, I don't think it's much of an issue for a young white man or woman, and of course I say that respectfully, because there are different dimensions of diversity and intersectionality. I take that all into account, but to be able to, a young white, young cis straight hetero male, being able to look at in a firm and seeing what the leadership looks like. So I think that representation is very important to getting that conversation beyond just us talking about it and us seeing it instead. We have a way to go.
That's fair enough.
On our way.
Exactly right. But Susie, I feel like maybe you have something to share.
I was just going to add, even within our Legal Marketing Association, we were talking about, this is our sort of first inaugural discussion on this topic. And I think LMA is making some great strides, because I did fill in a survey so that, I can look and connect with other racialized professional marketers within our own association. So representation, that connectivity is very key, and it has to happen at many different levels through different channels, right? We're talking about our clients, but if you look around at the networks, they can be enriched by whether we got to that allyship topic or not, but they can.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we can. they can be enriched by the experiences that that we share, and those that are willing and able to volunteer and self-identify with different groups. I think there's value in that.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Let's take this moment right now to dive right into allyship. We've talked about it and touched on it a couple of times. So, Corinne, I'm looking at you. We know we want change. We know we need support for that change. We need champions. And as we've discussed, we also need allies. So what is allyship to you? What should allies be doing? I'd mentioned that mistakes are inevitable. So again, what are some of those mistakes that are inevitable, that either are commonplace or that you've seen sort of in practice, and what can be done to deal with them?
I think I'm at a really high level, I have a high bar for allyship. And so and sometimes we're like, that's too harsh. I'm like, but I can't accept any lower because I'm raising two young Indigenous girls. They're 13 and 15, and they're going to be going into places, and I want to make sure that and I live in Alberta. So I have a very hard line when it comes to allyship in terms of, I always say it's more than just wearing the orange shirt. It's really easy to have Orange Shirt Day and to wear the orange shirt and to do all those things and to be there to kind of get a part of all of that it feels good. Allyship shouldn't just feel good. It's not just about making yourself feel good, but about making actual instrumental change. And when I think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was calls to action that were given to all Canadians. It wasn't just given to lawyers, doctors, it was given to everybody. And so when I think about those calls to action and allyship, it's a 24/7 job. We don't just get to be allies at work. If we're not going home and doing that work at our kitchen tables and having those hard conversations, then we're just doing lip service. We're just wearing the orange shirt. So it has to embody who we are as people, as humans, because in order to create actual change in Canada outside of our little offices, it starts in our homes. It starts at our kitchen tables. So I'm a big advocate of kitchen table conversations and having courageous conversations and having with people that don't get to come into the places that we are. That don't get to have those conversations, but Easter's coming up, people. And so it's a great opportunity to talk to people about what are they doing towards reconciliation? What have they learned about Indigenous people this year? And I think great in Canada, we're having these huge conversations around rights and freedoms, and what does that look like for us as Indigenous people, and what does it look like for other people? And so having meaningful conversations, and we're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. And so I think a lot of people, they get afraid if they do the wrong thing. And so I always like, well, it's better to do something than to do nothing at all. I said, because nobody's ever got it right the first time. And so when I think about Justice Murray Sinclair, when he was the commissioner for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he said it took us 7 generations to get here. And so it's going to take us 7 generations to get back to someplace that's adequate for Indigenous people. And so I think about it takes a little of that pressure off. And so I think about, we're probably the 2nd generation in terms of that change. My children are the 1st generation to not have to go to residential school. And so we're just at that tipping point of change in terms of where we are in Canada. And so it's really continuing to just move that forward. And so it's for me, that's how I think about it. It's okay to not know, and it's really about being vulnerable. We can't change without becoming vulnerable, and that's a scary thing. But I can tell you, as someone who watches people moving forward and making those changes and doing those things to create safer places for myself, I appreciate it. And I always say, when in doubt, ask. Always ask. We're in an age where we can Google everything. And so doing the research and asking the questions. And if not, somebody said, I was in a thing and they said, well, why do we need to do this now? Why do we need to push for this change on this diversity issue on this one organization? And I said, well, if not now, when?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Corinne, you mentioned it all starts at home. And I feel like we're all kind of sitting at a kitchen table right now, and we have a lot of invisible guests that have joined us. So, it's all sort of starting right now with these types of discussions. And, what I'm really hearing from you as well is, making sure that people are aware that it's okay to make mistakes. We're not perfect. This is not a linear, scale up here. There's going to be lots of divots. There's going to be, it's a fluid experience. And I think just making room for that type of conversation and allowances is probably something that's going to extend some comfort. But again, I open it up to the floor. Susie, Samantha, like, what are your thoughts on allyship? What have you seen that's worked in practice? And what does it mean to you specifically?
I can, so allyship is, there is a technical definition for allyship that maybe some people don't even realize, and it speaks to individuals who are recognizing their own privilege, right? Their own privilege, and using it to influence the inclusion and diversity, to call out issues and problems and challenges, challenging behaviors, so that these behaviors can be eliminated eventually, right? So allyship, it's important, but as was just mentioned, one of the pitfalls we have to be careful of is allies sometimes are trying to be allies, but they don't ask the right questions, and they end up trying to address an issue that they haven't clearly understood. There's a lot more discussion of late about allyship. So again, I think the education is going to help move things along, because it's very difficult. We cannot do this alone. I don't have all the answers. Sometimes I'm wondering, like, okay, well, what do we need? So having diversity of thought in coming and addressing these issues, I think is very important, and allyship is key to longer term success.
Samantha, any closing thoughts on that front?
No, absolutely. They said, just took the words out of my mouth and nailed it on the head. I think it's allyship is many things, and I think very importantly, as they both touched on, it's just an individual commitment to learning, listening, caring, and recognizing privilege. I think that's one of the main ones that I feel like a lot of people are still on the learning phase, but I think we need I think Corinne kind of touched on this, is move into action, because there's again a lot of work to be done. So people recognizing their privilege, using that privilege, using voices of power to speak to power and create change. And Susie touched on this as well. Just it's not performative. It can't be performative, because that's not allyship. I'm not even sure why it's called performative allyship, because it's just literally not allyship if it is performative. And Corinne's touched on the orange shirt several times, and that example she gives is performative, when you put on an orange shirt and don't do much else. So I think it's important to take those steps to actually do the work. And of course, that including the voices of these underrepresented groups, and not asking them, oh, teach me, because first of all, please, no, thank you, please. If we walk away with never doing one thing again, it's that. But I think that doesn't mean that we don't include the voices of these groups, disenfranchised groups and communities, into the solution. Because I think that's performative as well, is when we have that savior complex without considering what changes need to be made from those individual perspectives and group perspectives of those disenfranchised communities.
You took the words right out of my mouth in terms of an overall closing. I've been trying to sort of, pocket little takeaways, and I think that was a perfect outline and summary. And Susie, I think one of the things that you had mentioned was, we don't have all the answers, and that's why that level of, open dialogue, and it's okay to make mistakes, and we need to sit in our vulnerability. We need to understand our privilege. We need to make sure that we're not just performative, because sure, your website might have a whole list of items of, we contribute here, we do this, but if you're not monitoring this internally, if you have no active way for reporting, there's a disconnect. There's a very, very clear disconnect. So that's something that definitely we've got to move on internally. And I think your point is very well taken in terms of we all need to take accountability for this, and we're going to be uncomfortable for quite some time as we sort through this, and we just have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
That's it.
Okay, fantastic. Susie, I've got another specific question from the proposals, client-facing material side of things. So do you have any guidance on, who should be included, who goes to see the client? My overall question is, how do you start to break down some of the status quo principles, practices, and how do you start to build up that diverse and equitable group of lawyer teams for a client?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a challenge because law firms are behind in terms of the percentage of diverse lawyers currently practicing. And we have intelligent clients, you cannot put figurehead the same Black lawyer on every case. So there's a couple things that you can do. First of all, do make sure that you do have checks and balances in place. Like our Director of Pursuits and Proposals works very closely with the lawyers to look initially at the team makeup, because sometimes lawyers get comfortable and they call their partners that they're familiar with, and they might completely miss the gender component. And those are things that organizations that we look at specifically, and it happens, I guess, less frequently now because more of our partners are thinking broader. It's part of our culture. It's part of our strategic commitment to build a workplace that is inclusive. But you have to have these practices in place to look at. Okay, what is the makeup of our team? We have to put the best people forward. That's what the client expects. Where we can start to influence that is what we do at the grassroots level. We've got to find the best talent. So working with your recruiting partners to identify early on the students, articling students, summer students, first-year associates that are able to bring those diverse perspectives and are ambitious and trainable, right? So that they too can be included when they're ready. So I think it's you have to be mindful to put the right people in place as the opportunities present themselves. There are opportunities working with clients to introduce more junior lawyers. So I think clients expect that. We do that to try and zipper the relationship all along the succession spectrum. So it's acceptable to introduce a more junior partner that that can bring that diverse perspective and representation. Yeah, the goal is you have to start early. Like I said, we have some catching up to we have some catching up to do. We're working to put the best lawyers in place, and we're working to make sure that we are attracting the best lawyers. And just I guess one other thing on the directory representation, right? You're looking at best in class. Legal publishers are now much more open and encourage nominations rather than just pure selections of who partners might see across the table, so that they are getting more of the fabric of diverse practicing lawyers that have the expertise, but maybe are not as top of mind. We're at least now getting opportunities to put them on those ballots, all right, in those best in class ballots. So those are a couple of things that you have to be conscious about who you're putting forward.
Yeah, it sounds like there's no fine science, there's no equation yet. It's a lot of balancing what the client's needs are, what their expectations are, also reflecting in terms of what your workforce has to offer and trying to find a match where best you can.
That's it. And again, we are reporting so that if things are not improving, our EDIC takes a look at that and determines, do we need some corrective measures? What do we need? Do we need more recruiting? Do we need more training to try and influence those numbers of who we bring into the firm, so that we can continue to provide that those diverse client teams?
I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, and please, panel, let me know if you feel otherwise, but I think one of the bigger takeaways that I think we should all encourage our attendees to move on with is the importance of reporting. If you have no foresight, you're essentially moving blind, and yes, there are conversations, and we're at least talking, but action comes through knowledge. And in the absence of any reporting, we can't really make any very either corrective actions or any progressive actions, even if they're small, year over year. Samantha, I'm going to move over to you for a second, and I'm curious in terms of making sure that your client teams are well staffed. What are some of the challenges that you may have seen or come across when it comes to trying to implement some of these types of initiatives?
I'm not sure if there are specific challenges I can point to. I think the biggest one is the lack of representation. There need to be more people in here for us to be able to. And Susie made a good point of, you don't want to put the same one Indigenous, one Black, one racialized lawyer on a deal. But I mean, when you have one Indigenous, one Black, one LGBTQ plus, like it's difficult not to. And so I think the main thing one of the main things we need to focus on is, again, getting representation in the door. But again, if you do that and don't have the inclusionary piece and equity piece, then they're not going to stay. So it all works together. I think that's the largest issue, just like the lack of representation. And so again, then when we're getting, and this is a problem, an issue just right across the board. I'm part of the NALP CDLE group when we're trying to figure out a way to get even the reporting out to students generally of what representation looks like in our organizations, and it's abysmal when you look at the numbers. So then I think step one is, let's fix that. Let's increase representation, because and I think the excuse at least used to be that, well, there aren't many law students who fall in these groups, and we can't say that anymore, because there certainly are. So who are we appealing to? And then also, and I think Corinne mentioned this, is sometimes the students, they talk amongst themselves. They know where the places are, the firms are, where they might not feel included. So they might self-select out of even applying there. So it's all a big circle, and all comes back down to.
It sounds like a really big, a cyclical problem. And how do you just interject? And again, it comes through action and it comes through change. And I think, when it comes to recruitment, it sounds like that's really a key piece. And if we're not able to report on what this looks like, or what they might have to gain from joining an organization that might not have representation otherwise, that's certainly a big challenge. And I think, and again, this is open to the floor, but how do you combat that? Is it through ownership, accountability? Is it through transparency? But it's also a very delicate subject to broadcast. So how do you even approach that subject?
Well, I think, certainly accountability. I think we're past the stage of being able to even hide behind not being accountable. I mean, if they aren't strictly reported, these students at least are talking to people who can get them a good sense of numbers. And so definitely being accountable, but then just doing work to fix these issues. So for instance, I sit in on all of our, I'm in the room for all of our student recruitment. BLG, we have 5 offices, and for each of the recruitment cycles, I'm in the room when the decisions are being made on, oh, well, this student or that student. And Lolly Mosheri, who I work with, she's our director, National Director of Diversity and Inclusion. She calls me a bias interrupter in those moments. And not to say that we have just very biased teams, not at all, but I think there's just unconscious bias a lot of times, and especially in those processes where things are happening so fast, and decisions are being made, just being able to sit there and say, oh, no, like, have we considered this? Have we considered the fact that this office has not hired an Indigenous student in the last 4 years? Well, what are we doing? We have this amazing candidate, like, immediately put them through. Like, so I think it's so important to have even little, it seems like a little thing, but I think that was kind of like a revolution when I came in and said, I want to go, like, fly me out to Vancouver for their student recruitment process, and being in the rooms a lot of times, having just first met these partners and lawyers who are on the student committee, and like, who is this? And I'm like, I'm here to take over. Just kidding. But I think that is very important to do, and it seems like a little thing, but the change that we're able to see from just having a voice in the room, specifically dedicated to ensuring that diversity and inclusion is top of everyone's mind, because it's everyone's responsibility. But I think people might sometimes forget that, especially when there's someone like me who's in this role full time. Then it's kind of like, oh, it's your job. No, it's all of our job. I just get paid for it, so I do it. And very importantly, do it more, like, it's always at the top of my mind, but I think it's until there's buy-in from the top right down, we're not going to see the change that we need.
It has to be a part of your strategy, and I think that's the important takeaway.
Absolutely.
So I am mindful, folks, of our timing here. I just want to give Corinne 30 seconds, just any final thoughts on, limitations or challenges that you might incur when trying to deal or trying to, basically implement DEI initiatives. Just 30 seconds, real quick.
I think it's also the support for your diverse lawyers that work with. So not just paying for their membership to the Canadian Bar Association, but promoting and paying for their membership for any other organization where they can have places where they can see, like, if you only have the one Indigenous person or whatever it is, but whether it's the Indigenous Bar Association or the Canadian Black Lawyers Association, but ensuring that they can go to those places where they can reconnect, so they can build a community. If they don't have the community yet in their organization, which is okay because we're just starting, but ensuring that they have that ability to go build, especially in that legal community, because it can be very lonely if you're the only person. So yeah.
So opportunity for community building, definitely transparency, ownership in terms of what that reporting looks like, and boldly talking about it and making sure that we're making the strategic high-level decisions that will then implement and affect change sort of at the more tactical on the ground pieces is what I'm really taking away from this group. So again, I've got just 2 more questions. One of them is from our audience. Samantha, I'm going to punt this one over to you. Given the let me just pull that up. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. So this comes from an anonymous attendee, but given the murder of George Floyd, which finally prompted some acknowledgement of the systemic racism last year, or I feel like it's been 2 years,
2 years
now.
Yeah.
Right, it's all a blur with COVID. How do law firms keep this issue of racism in focus? How do we make sure that we don't lose momentum here? Again, news is always fast changing. How do we make sure that we're able to really focus on that?
By institutionalizing the change. And that's why it's very important to do. So I think that's the first thing I said, because I think, again, hot topics come. There's always so many issues. And I think so that we're able to continuously address these, because everyone talking about anti-Black racism in 2020, that was, again, a wonderful first start, but certainly not the work that needs to be done to undo it. That work is going to take a very long time to undo. So creating processes, we for instance had mandatory anti-Black racism training, and then we have a race affinity action group where we're consistently doing work. We have a 3-part series. We started for Black History Month on redefining allyship. And so we had our first session in February, but we had our second session yesterday, and our third session is going to be in April, and just continuing the conversation, educational training year round, because you can't confine Black history, anti-Black racism issues to any point of time. It didn't stop with George Floyd, and certainly didn't start there. So there's so much work to be done in making sure that processes are continued and are aligned in all of the different policies. Like, so we've taken a look back at all of our policies and found ways that we can implement change and action towards creating more inclusive spaces, towards addressing barriers that Black lawyers, staff have faced at the firm. And so doing that work continuously, I think is very important.
So it sounds like, again, having a clear project owner who can really drive this, lead this, making sure that it's not just lip service. We actually have plans in place to really tactically change, the level of understanding, knowledge, education, and then ultimately shifting that into action. Folks, we have just a minute, so I wanted to thank everyone for joining us here today. We hope that you have really taken away some really key learning pieces. I have just really been grateful for the opportunity to speak with this panel, to share our experiences with you. And ultimately, what I think our biggest takeaways are, and please let me know if there's anything else, but reporting remains to be a big challenge and something that firms must address. Making sure that we have the right pipelines and talent procedures in place to make sure that we are then meeting clients' needs based on our existing workforce, and remaining open, vulnerable, so that we can talk about these really hard things, but then knowing that there's a limit to where we end those conversations, or at least put a pause and shift into action. Is there anything that I missed that you really want our viewers to take away?
No, and I'm realizing it's 1 p.m., but I think it all sounds so big and scary, but it's really, once you start doing the little things, I'm actually realizing that I don't have my pronouns in my Zoom name. I think Zoom reset, but like little things like that, that seem little, but are really huge for the experiences of the people within our firms and organizations. So I think just the little daily steps and continuing to do that work and learning ourselves. One last question. I'm going to throw this over to Corinne. Any resources that folks can maybe lean into if they want to learn more?
We have a website, Dakota and Law and Governance Lodge at the University of Alberta, and we have a lot of information on Indigenous history and Indigenous laws, and we also have database on diversity and racism education, and any programs that we see, we kind of try to build up that database so people can have some tools and some knowledge.
Fantastic. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for their attendance, their time, their consideration. Please look out for details on the next LMA session, Amplifying Relationships and Business Development Through Coaching, which will be coming out next month. For now, again, thank you all for your time, and day by day, conversation by conversation, procedure by procedure, we will together affect some really great change. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.